Hi there. Today I'm going to trim this small spherical heart-shaped vase. There's a lot of clay on the bottom because I threw this off the hump, and the clay there was left on to support the pot when I lifted it off so it didn't distort. But now it's got to go, and I want to end up with something more like this, where I've carved a footring inside the bottom of the pot, and it's maybe 3 millimeters or two maybe on the bottom there, and instead of being at the moment at least a centimetre, half an inch or so. So let's get to it. So I'm using this chuck, so-called, for trimming my vases on. It's just something I've thrown on the wheel and not fired, so it's still greenware. Now you can see it's not been fired, it's got algae growing on it in my quite damp studio. I'm putting this on my chuck, which is stabilising the shape, but I have to get it centred so it's not tilted. It's never going to be completely perfect because of the way it was thrown, but kind of on average that's about upright now. So you can see I've got to get rid of a lot of clay here. First thing to do is just take away that bottom bit that was formed when I cut it off with the thread. For details, have a look at my previous video about throwing this kind of vase off the hump. And what I'm doing is just evening that off with a hefty loop tool that was given to me in Japan. So I'm finding it really useful, this tool. It's quite hard metal. It's not nearly as hard as tungsten carbide, which is I'll be using in a minute. Now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get this bottom bit fairly small, so it's easier to deal with. I'm just imagining the walls, the outside walls, coming up roughly the sort of shape I want them to make in the end. So it's all quite crude at this point, and I'm tapping it to get an idea of how much thickness is left. The first thing I want to do is just get rid of clay that I just don't need. If I left all this, then my footring would be very deep. I don't fancy that, so as soon as it starts to sound a little hollow, then I know I've got another ½ a centimetre or so to play with. It's getting there. Speed the wheel up a little bit. It's always a good tip when you are having to do delicate work to speed the wheel up and just press less hard with your tools. Now that's starting to sound a little bit hollow, so I think I'm ready to start smoothing this out. So I moved to a different tool. I don't know why, but I've ended up using lots of different trimming tools at the same time. Whoops. Now if it ever goes out of shape like that, just slow the wheel down and bring it back. I guess I should do a video about how to do that. Centering, tap centering. It's a really useful skill. So now I'm just flattening this bottom bit with my very sharp tungsten carbide tool. Now sometimes it's too sharp, this tool, for the state of the clay, and it cuts into it. It drags into the clay, but I'm trying to avoid that. But I can avoid that. So sometimes this tungsten carbide tool is too sharp, and that's when the clay is just a bit too damp. So I'm just being very gentle now. I know I've got a few millimeters to play with, so I'm not tapping it just yet, but I will do now. See how we're doing. It's getting quite close to where I need it to be. In fact, I'll just do this one more ½ a millimeter or so, and then that'll be enough. Just tidy it up. You can see the torsion in the clay. From when it was thrown. Right, now I'll just tidy that last bit up there. Just putting that little bevel in there will help me wax it later on. I'm just smoothing it with my nail and the skin of my finger, so that after it's fired, it won't be too sharp. Now let's do the outside. So it's all fine down the bottom, nice and smooth, but as I get towards the top, I sometimes find finger marks or places where I just a little bit indented, where I lifted it off the hump. And that sometimes causes my trimming tool to judder a bit. You can hear it there. So a bit less pressure on the tool. And go down again. So I'm trimming my walls to a couple of 2 or 3 millimeters thick. So it's all nice and light. Okay, take that off there. So I've got a little bit of juddering that I have to get rid of. And now let's just check the walls. That's very thin. And maybe you can hear the difference. So up here it's thicker, which is fine. That's where it needs to be, because it'll need support during the firing so that it doesn't slump at that point. I don't want to make it too much thinner than that. Now I'm going to do the final smoothing. This is just a little octagon of a card I had. It's a British Library card. When I used to be in the British Library every day, reading the most abstruse texts for fun. I love that place. Okay, I'm just using a flexible metal kidney to do a final smoothing. I need the walls of my pots to be quite smooth for when I write on them in general, and this flexible kidney gives me that. I've got various ones I use. There's a more hefty one for bigger pieces, and this really thin one is very sharp. I've cut myself a couple of times using that one. Let's see where we are. I think that's good enough. I'll just tidy up this foot ring now. Just put a bevel on the outside. Smooth that off. Just do a double check. I can just trim this off, and it's a bit flat on the bottom there, so I'm just going to make it a bit more round. I'm trying to match the roundness of the inside on the outside. Partly it's aesthetic, but more than that, it's about making sure that the bottom is an even thickness and is the same thickness as the walls around it as far as possible, or near enough, just to avoid any cracking. Smooth it a bit more. It feels okay. So I lift it off. I just get a general feel for it. Yeah, that's quite light, and happy with that. So now I've just got to do the top. So I turn it around, slot it in again, and again tap center it. As well as I can. Now I wasn't too fussy when I threw this about how the rim looks, because this is the stage where I refine the rim to make it the shape I want. So I'm using my very sharp metal kidney. I do go a little bit inside as well. Let's feel how that's like, what that's like. Yeah, a bit more. So just making sure that rim feels nice. And not too thin. Okay, now I'm going to shape the outside. Using the curvature of my metal tool to define the curvature of that rim. It mustn't be too sharp on this bit here because otherwise the glaze won't stay on that very thin line. It pulls away from it in the kiln if I'm not careful, so just have to just flatten that a bit, just smooth it down with my fingernail. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to my trimming tool and trim this bit of the wall. Just feel how thin it is. And now finally, tidy it all up so that all the curves work together and match. Because I've got a concave curve match up against the convex curve, and I need to make sure they smoothly join. And if you know any physics or calculus, it's about making sure the derivative between the two is defined. So again, speeding the wheel up and pressing lighter on the tool means you have more control over the very fineness of the surface. Okay, that's about right. Just smooth that a bit off there. There we go. So again, holding it in my hand now, it's even. I can't feel where the weight is. So I know it's about right. So now I'm just going to sign it. And the way I do that with these small ones, it's not ideal. I probably should have a stamp, but I like to carve directly. And I'm just going to use an old trimming tool on the corner, make a little T directly on the foot. There we are. Just to compare the untrimmed version and the trimmed version. So this one's untrimmed. There's the messy bottom. Let's see how much it weighs. 406 grams. So about 400 grams for the untrimmed one. And this is the trimmed version. That's about the same size, 304. So lost about a quarter of the weight. If you enjoyed that, then click the subscribe button and the like button and every other button that's going, because I don't think YouTube does a dislike button anymore, which is quite nice. Next time, I'm going to be recycling the trimmings that came off this and many other pots. I've got a lot of trimmings in the studio and they all need to be recycled and put back into production. So until then.